Hi, I'm Russ Mayfield, investment strategist at Baird, and we are back for another weekly update with our friends at Strategas. Today, we are lucky enough to be joined by Managing Director and Washington Research Analyst Jeannette Lowe. Jeannette, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing well, Ross. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thanks. And I should note up top, we're recording on Thursday morning, so a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about is pretty timely, is happening behind the scenes as we speak. But I want to start with the status of the big tax bill. It's moved from the House to the Senate. We know that there's a lot of things being picked apart, changes on the margins. What are the big things you're watching, and what do you broadly expect for a timeline? Again, knowing that this stuff is all kind of happening as we're having this conversation.
Yeah, so we were anticipating that the Senate was going to get its version of the bill done by the July 4th holiday. So potentially working that through this weekend to get it done. And then the House, depending on what the final version of that Senate bill looks like, the House would either take it up and just vote on it, or they may want to move to a conference, which is basically the two chambers negotiating and deciding how to change the bill to make both parties or both chambers happy. And then that could take a little bit longer. So maybe we might be looking at another week or so after the July 4th holiday before this gets done. We have had some complications in the Senate. So the Senate parliamentarian rules on what provisions can be used in the reconciliation process, which is this special process that they're using to have something pass in the Senate with just 51 votes rather than 60. And so she's ruled out a number of provisions that were included in the Senate's bill, and some of those are important for how much revenue it would raise. And so that's going to create some complications moving forward as to how they might have to reshape this bill. They could maybe just change some of those provisions to make it work, or they may have to kind of do a lot more working on this bill over the weekend. So this could delay passage. We still think the Senate's going to try to push as hard as it can to get this done by the July 4th holiday. But that's adding a complication as we move into the weekend, and the work will definitely continue throughout this weekend as we move forward. So there's some big changes between the House and the Senate bill. Some of the things that have been most important lately has been topics about Medicaid cuts. This will obviously have impacts on state budgets depending on what cuts are actually implemented. But that has been one of the big changes in the Senate that's been more aggressive actually than what we saw in the House. And that's been creating some issues within the House, within the Senate, Republicans, and between the House and the Senate as well. There's also some issues about taxes and some things that have been removed by the Senate that were included in the House bill that the House members would like to have put back. One of the things I think is most important though about this bill is that it does include several pro-growth, pro-business provisions, which is immediate expensing of R&D costs, immediate expensing of CapEx, and immediate expensing of factory building or domestic production facilities, which are all really important pieces of Trump's domestic manufacturing agenda. Those are in the bill, regardless whether it's the House or the Senate. The Senate wants to make them permanent versus the House making them just inapplicable for several years. But that's something else that they kind of need to work forward on. But I think that's really important because that will be something that's key to helping to sterilize the tariffs that have been put in place, and will also help to encourage more business investment in the U.S.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned tariffs. So we were talking about this off mic. We're going to go into a holiday week next week, and then we're going to come back on Monday, July 7th, and be right on the doorstep of the end of that 90-day reciprocal tariff pause. Where do we stand on trade with some of these tariff negotiations? I know we had the kind of soft announcement of a deal with the UK, but past that, it's been pretty quiet, particularly with some of the geopolitical news sucking up a little bit of the air in the room. So where do we stand? What are you expecting, and what are you watching from here?
Yeah, so you're exactly right. We really only have that one trade deal. I mean, it's hard to make, 60 trade deals in 90 days or trades with all the countries. But that has been proving to be even more difficult than I think even the White House anticipated. So we only have the UK deal announced. Obviously, there are still 2 weeks to go. We could get a deal announced right up close to the deadline, but it seems unlikely that we're going to see many actually announced. Japan had seemed like it was close to having some announcement done at the G7. That did not materialize, and there may be some effort for Japan to wait until after its election in later July. So what we could be looking at when we get to July 9th is that maybe the Trump administration extends the 10% reciprocal rate and extends the moratorium on the rates above that 10%, let's say for like another 90 days while these trade negotiations continue to play out. We also could see that maybe the Trump administration decides to try to make an example out of one or two countries. So maybe he raises the rate on one or two countries either by 5% or knocks it back to the original reciprocal rate that we saw on April 2nd. So if you think about like a country like Japan, that would mean going back to a 24% tariff rate. So we could see something along those lines. The other thing I would kind of point out too is that we do still have the continued threat of tariffs. So Trump has said that he wants to potentially put forward pharmaceutical tariffs, maybe soon. Soon can mean anything, but if it could be this summer, maybe that's something to also put pressure on maybe, say, Europe to come up with a trade deal if there's another tariff bucket coming. So that's something that we're going to be on the lookout for. So I'd say the big theme here is that we still have a lot of trade uncertainty. We think that in general, the 10% reciprocal tariff rate is going to stay in place long term. The bigger question is, do we see rates above that 10% going back into effect after July 9th? And do we see other sectoral tariffs like tariffs on pharmaceuticals or semiconductors or other things also coming into play? So still obviously a lot of uncertainty as we move into that next deadline.
Yeah, and very important because as the market approaches all-time highs here, I don't think it's pricing in a reversion higher of many of these tariff rates. I think there's an assumption that the worst of the tariff bite has been taken out of the market. So something to keep an eye on. We appreciate the time as always, the insight, very useful, and we'll look forward to talking to you again soon.
All right. Thank you so much.